Ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah has now taken effect, bringing an end to more than a year of fighting. NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell has the latest.
Just hours after new Israeli strikes against Hezbollah targets in Beirut, the Iranian-backed militia the U.S. designates as a terror group.
Have some good news to report from the Middle East.
President Biden announcing both sides have agreed to a ceasefire.
Let's be clear. Israel did not launch this war. The Lebanese people did not seek that war either.
The latest conflict started a day after the October 7th Hamas attacks, when Hezbollah began firing rockets from Lebanon into Israel. With the deal, some 80,000 Israelis who evacuated from the north can now go home, while Lebanese officials say more than 3,000 of its citizens have been killed, more than 1 million displaced by the Israeli strikes. Israel's prime minister backing the ceasefire, saying it is no longer the same Hezbollah. We have set it back decades. Netanyahu also saying Israel has killed Hezbollah's leader and its top deputies, destroyed most of the group's missiles and rockets, killed thousands of terrorists and destroyed their tunnels. Netanyahu also saying Israel reserves the right to resume fighting if Hezbollah breaks the ceasefire, and he'll now focus on the threat from Iran, while President Biden is hoping for a deal in Gaza.
People of Gaza have been through hell, and Hamas has refused for months and months to negotiate a good faith ceasefire and a hostage deal. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens.
Andrea Mitchell reporting there. Joining us now, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, good morning. Good to have you with us. So if you can, now that this is out in the open, now that this has taken effect and been announced by the president, take us back a little bit to the origins of this deal, how you got to a place that some people thought was impossible, which is a ceasefire, again, with the caveat we'll see if it holds from both sides, but how you got Hezbollah to the table, how you got Israel to agree to this ceasefire.
Well, as you know, Willie, and first, thanks for having me. This war began the day after October 7th, the day after Hamas launched that brutal massacre of Israelis on October 7th. It began because Hezbollah started firing at Israel, and they have fired consistently for months and months. They have forced tens of thousands of Israeli citizens from their homes, and so Israel fought back. And what we have seen over the course of the last few months is that Israel has been able to badly degrade Hezbollah, take out their terrorist infrastructure, eliminate their top leaders, destroy their rocket and missile stockpiles, to the point where Hezbollah does not represent anything like the organization it was before October 7th. That has put Israel in the position to come to the table from a position of strength. And on the side of Lebanon, the people of Lebanon did not want this war and did not want to be held hostage in the war by Hezbollah. And so the stakeholders in Lebanon also were prepared to come to the table. But it required intense, persistent American diplomacy over months, led by President Biden, driven by our envoy Amos Hochstein, coordinated in this building behind me, and it finally culminated in the ceasefire that took effect this morning. This is a good step in the Middle East. There is more work to do in Gaza and elsewhere, but we believe that this is the beginning of an opportunity for a more stable Middle East in which Israel's security is assured and U.S. interests are secured.
As you know well, of course, and everyone watching the show knows at this point that Hezbollah is an Iran-backed group. What role did Iran have in reaching this settlement?
Iran was not involved in the negotiations, but of course, Hezbollah doesn't make decisions completely independently of Iran, so surely behind the scenes there were consultations between Hezbollah and Iran. But at the table was the United States with the support of countries and allies like France, and then representatives from Lebanon on one side and Israel on the other side in indirect negotiations. And at this point, beyond Hezbollah being weakened, Iran itself has been weakened. Its main proxy ally in the Middle East, Hezbollah, is now a shadow of its former self. And we have been able to achieve all of this, Willie, without the United States being dragged into a war in the Middle East, and that is a good thing. Now we turn our attention to try to bring about a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, and then build for a brighter future in the Middle East. And we don't know how long it will take to achieve that, but we will use every last day we have in office to try to achieve it.
So, Jake, good morning. Jonathan Lemire. Following up on that exact point, we heard from President Biden yesterday vowing once again to bring home American hostages there in Gaza to get that deal done. Can you update us as to the status of talks? There have been a number of occasions in recent months where it felt like a deal was imminent and then fallen apart. What's the latest from Hamas, and do you have buy-in also from Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel?
President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu before going out to announce that the ceasefire had been accepted by both sides. Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed with President Biden that we should take another run at getting a good deal, a good ceasefire and hostage deal that brings hostages home, including American citizens. And President Biden intends to begin that work today by having his envoys engage with Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and other actors in the region. There have been ongoing indirect contacts through the mediators with Hamas in recent weeks. We believe that now that we have a ceasefire in Lebanon, the pressure will only grow on Hamas to reach a deal. I can't predict if and when it will happen, but I can tell you that we are going to put every ounce of effort we have into making it happen and to getting those hostages home.
Mike Barnicle, we were talking to David Ignatius a moment ago, saying in this region you have to, even if it's for a moment, celebrate when diplomacy prevails because it is so rare, and it has done so in the case of this ceasefire.
There's reason to celebrate, obviously, Willie, but there's a fuse always lit in that region of the world. And, Jake, I'd like to ask you about that fuse that remains burning in some places in the Middle East. There's the President of the United States. There's the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. There's Amos Hochstein, as you just mentioned. There's you. There's Brett McGurk. There's Bill Burns, the director of the CIA. All of you coordinated around a single goal of getting the ceasefire done. So a ceasefire has been implemented for the moment. Could you talk about the degree of difficulty in coordinating all of these efforts, all of these various trips to various countries in the Middle East, and coming up to a point where there seems to be success for the moment and maybe further success down the road? How hard has this been?
I think it's a great question, Mike, and the answer is very, very hard. It's never easy to achieve a day like today in the Middle East, and in particular, given just the extent and the depth of the conflict we've seen over the last year, it was particularly difficult. I would just make 3 points. First, diplomacy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens backed by deterrence and by military deployment that can shape the decisions of our adversaries. And at critical moments over the last year, President Biden coordinated here at the White House with the Defense Department to deploy American aircraft carriers, American fighter squadrons, and even a sophisticated American air defense battery to Israel to send a clear message that we were going to defend Israel and deter our enemies. So that helped set the conditions. Second, at critical moments, the United States backed Israel in the steps it took to dismantle terror infrastructure in southern Lebanon so that it could look its people in the eye and say, this deal will allow you to return to your home safely. And then third, as you said, the intensive conversations that were required in Israel, in Lebanon, in Europe with France and other allies, at the United Nations, in other places, all of that is, in a way, a multi-dimensional game of chess that has to be coordinated out of this building behind me, led by the President of the United States and executed by that group of people you just said. We are proud of what we have accomplished. But your point that we can't rest on our laurels because this now needs to be implemented and now further ceasefires need to be achieved, it means we're rolling up our sleeves to go back to work.
Jake, your successor, the incoming National Security Advisor, Congressman Mike Waltz, celebrated, touted this deal yesterday. He posted on X, though, saying this: everyone is coming to the table because of President Trump. His resounding victory sent a clear message to the rest of the world that chaos won't be tolerated. I'm glad to see concrete steps toward de-escalation in the Middle East. There is this idea that some countries and some even terrorist groups are falling in line because they believe a new administration might be tougher on them. What's your response?
Well, first, we've had good coordination with the incoming team, and I've kept Congressman Waltz apprised at every step of the way, including yesterday as we were closing this out. I'm glad to see that they're welcoming it. I would just say that it makes me particularly proud to have achieved this because you know you've done a good thing when other people want to take credit for it. So as far as I'm concerned, this is positive for America. I'm not here to talk about credit. I'm here to report to the American people that this has gone into effect, and I'm here to explain to the American people that it is the result of relentless diplomacy led by the President of the United States, who's currently sitting in the Oval Office, President Joe Biden.
Jake, Elise Jordan here. Let's talk about the humanitarian conditions on the ground in Gaza. In northern Gaza, in particular, the UN has warned that there's a risk of famine, and the head of the UN humanitarian agency has said that Israel has not been letting aid shipments in. And we had also 30 days ago or so threatened to withhold aid if that aid did not start getting to Gaza and to the population that needs it. Where are we with getting the aid to help this horrific situation on the ground?
Well, as you know, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin sent a letter to their Israeli counterparts. It was not a threat. It was a list of requests that the United States was making consistent with our values, our interest in international law, to get more aid into Gaza. On some of those requests, we have seen progress. On others, we have not seen enough progress. We have seen more aid go into Gaza since the letter was sent, but not enough. And in particular, as you know, not enough into northern Gaza, where there are areas of very intense active fighting. So we are very much focused on working with Israel and the United Nations to surge more aid, more humanitarian assistance through more crossings so that we avert the risk of famine. We have come to the brink of famine in other parts of Gaza before, and it's been through relentless American diplomacy that we've gotten aid in to stave it off. It is our intent and purpose to make sure that we get as much life-saving aid as possible to the innocent people of Gaza, even as Israel continues to take the fight to Hamas.
All right, and we'll see if the ceasefire can be reached there as well. The good news again this morning, a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel brokered by the Biden administration. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, thanks so much and happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving, and thank you, guys.